So good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm Hannah Cunliffe. I'm Director of National Historic Ships, the government-funded body set up to represent the interests of historic vessels in the UK. And I'm delighted to welcome you to this event, which we're running in partnership with the Maritime Heritage Trust, the sector's national membership body. This is the second in a series of webinars aimed at addressing critical issues for historic vessels. And we've organised these following a Maritime Heritage Trust event on the 5th of January with Dan Cross from the Daniel Adamson Society and Richard Titchener from the Sea Change Sailing Trust. And this questioned whether we need a new approach for our sector to ensure that we can survive in these challenging times. And in response, on the 3rd of March, our first webinar looked at the ways of attracting new audiences and making historic vessels relevant in today's society. If you missed out on these earlier sessions, please don't worry. As you've probably heard, we're recording tonight's event, as we've done the previous ones, and they're all freely available online via the Maritime Heritage Trust's YouTube channel. We'll share the links to them in the chat tonight, so do feel free to watch them again afterwards or circulate to anyone who can't be here tonight. Next slide, please, Henry. So the focus of tonight's event is really the historic ship offer. In other words, what our sector can do for people and the many ways in which historic vessels and maritime heritage can enhance individual and community life. Now, we know that historic vessels can be a massive life influencer to all those who engage with them. They have the potential to create genuinely life-changing experiences, whether it's through learning new skills, working as one of a team of volunteers, or simply having a memorable day out. And tonight's speakers will be talking us through the variety of ways in which the vessels they work with have made an impact. And as you can see from tonight's programme, we've got 4 great presentations lined up. They're based on very different projects with varied experiences to share. And we'll be following this with a Q&A session during which we really want to hear from you, our audience. So please do post any comments and thoughts in the chat as we go along, or send questions via the Q&A box. And we'll try and get through as many as we can while still finishing by 9 o'clock. At the end of the session, we've allowed some time for closing remarks. I just want to reflect on some of the outputs from our first 2 webinars and to look at some learning points moving forwards. And I'll be joined for this part of the event by Henry Cleary, Vice Chair of the Maritime Heritage Trust, who's also masterminding the slides and the Zoom technology for us tonight. So I hope you find the event interesting. And as we're looking to continue this webinar series, we also want to hear from you on what topics you'd like us to cover next. So we will be running a short poll after the Q&A. So please make sure that you've got your fingers on the keyboard ready when it's time to cast your vote. Next slide, please, Henry. And now, without more ado, it gives me great pleasure to welcome the first of our speakers tonight. It's Mary Burch, the chair of the Skylark Recovery Trust. Skylark is a registered historic vessel. She was built as a motor cruiser in 1929, but then later played a significant part in the Second World War, first as a shallow water minesweeper and then during the evacuation of Dunkirk. Now, Mary's been involved with the trust set up to preserve her since it was formed back in 2013. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more about the project that she's initiated. Over to you, Mary.
Thank you very much, Hannah, and good evening, everyone. And it's always a delight to talk about Skylark IX. But Hannah said I only have 10 minutes and that I can't take the whole evening. So what I can in 10 minutes absolutely share about this, about Skylark IX. And we refer to Skylark IX, the little ship with the big heart, because that's exactly, if I can tell you a little bit more about her, she has such a huge heart. And we say recovery through recovery is kind of our tagline as well, because this little ship, as Hannah said, you know, went to Dunkirk, rescued over 600 men from the shores of Dunkirk in 1940. And she's still rescuing, she's still saving lives. And Henry, thank you. This next slide would be great as we talk about what is happening, how does Skylark contribute to our community, to the people around this area and beyond. Obviously the heritage that is there, a Dunkirk little ship. She came to Scotland, you know, she started her life down south and came to Scotland in the 1970s. So most of her life has been in Scotland. She's well adopted as a Scot for sure. But with that, within that, the heritage part of that, she was underwater and about to be just broken up. When we came in to rescue her, I was working with the Remembrance Association at that time and started the campaign, because this is too important, that piece of history that could just be broken up and lost. And that's why we started the campaign. We raised her and we worked together. The trust was formed with alternatives. This is where we start to go into the community. And there is a community programme, a drugs programme, Alternatives in Dumbarton. And we joined with Alternatives along with the Leaving Sailing Club, along with the veterans from the Remembrance Association, and formed this. And since then, we've just been the reach out to the community, not just working with people who are struggling with drugs addiction, recovering from drug addiction. We also touch with Dumbarton Area Council on Alcohol, so working with that. And lots of veterans who, you know, after coming out of the services, as you possibly know, may struggle with alcohol, with drugs, with isolation and loneliness, as well as some mental health issues that can affect them. So reaching into the community in various ways, where we have skiff building, they're learning skills, new skills that they can take into employment. So we bring that from the Lord Lieutenancy, MP, MSPs, schools, all of these people we bring in. The boat itself, that this is how she was in the 1970s when she came to Scotland, or she moved further north in Scotland to my area, to Loch Lomond, and how beautiful she looks there. And I'm sure if you look at her website, you'll see pictures of her today, and not looking so healthy. But the important thing about this is that she has been saved. And the wonderful part of this as well is that although we can't restore her, the cost of that, the project itself has grown. We started, we're going to rescue a little ship. We're going to raise her from the waters, and we're going to restore her. Sadly, that didn't take place, the cost, and I'm sure Henry will know all the ins and outs of what it's like to have to operate a boat, you know, and take passengers. But even better, our plan now is to build the Spirit of Skylark Centre, and this will be a heritage centre where we will have visitors, where Skylark will be placed as well. Lots for veterans, for the community, education, the children who are being involved. This is part of our community work here as well. And this is the lockdown quilt. And this was 50 people from our community who, during lockdown, when very little was happening, came together and made this quilt. And this Skylark quilt tells her story, the past and the present and her future, where she's going. So there's the history of Skylark in that one quilt. Education, children. So what's different? The community, the people we touch in the community, education involving young people we see as crucial. And we have wonderful links with the local schools, with uniformed organisations, with community groups. We have an education programme on the curriculum in local schools as well, and lots of activities. And this is a recent activity with the youngsters making model boats. So lots of learning going on, lots of outreach into the community over lockdown as well, reaching into the community where they were wood whittling, they were making wooden spoons, and reaching the sort of people who are isolated, who are perhaps sort of marginalised as well. And I think I've got a couple of more pictures just to show you about our work. Our veterans. This started with our veterans, the Dunkirk veterans, and sadly, we have none left in our area. Our last veteran, Dunkirk veteran, died 2 years ago. And for them, you can see Skylark as she was at that time when the veterans came to Ballach, and she was loaded, you know, she was full to the gunnels of people in that remembrance around Dunkirk. And that's another reason, you know, for the veterans, for the history that's there of all of the little ships. And that's why this project, you know, we will go forward. And maybe I think we might have another slide. The skiffs, boat building or shipbuilding in Dumbarton, you know, famous for shipbuilding in her day. And I think the last ship maybe built was in the 1960s. And we're bringing boat building back to Dumbarton. And not just that, the skills for these young people, but boat building back there. There will be a rowing club set up where we're looking, and that whole race, castle to crane. And there's the recovery through recovery. People who are struggling with difficulties in their life, and we're bringing this boat building skills they can take back into their community, take into jobs. And maybe I think I've got one more within my time at that. And that's me just say 200, this is recent, 280 plus hours of amazing community activity so far this year. And that all of these things, the boat building in stitches, you go, what has that got to do? What has got Skylark in stitches? What has that got to do with boats? But it's bringing a community together. It's bringing lots of people who, and we look at depression after lockdown, it's bringing these people together. And my last slide, I think, Henry, and that's it. It's just a little, all of the things that we do, you know, that make, do and mend. Yeah, again, what did people do in the war? So it might not, what's that got to do with a boat? But that is, if you take, it takes us back to the history we did in the 1940s, not me, I wasn't around, but that make, do and mend. The spirit of Skylark Centre, that's where we're headed. The skiff building, our exhibition, Hope Floats. And maybe that's what I'll leave with you. That is, hope absolutely floats. Thanks, Henry. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Mary. That was great and really interesting to hear how you've integrated that Skylark project into the community. And I particularly love the lockdown quilts. I think that's a wonderful concept and a great way to engage people. I'd like to move on now to our next speaker, who is Sher. He's the chair of the Friends of LV50. Light Vessel 50, or the House Yacht Tyne, as she is now known, is a vessel on the National Historic Fleet. She was actually recognised as one of our flagships last year based on her virtual activities. And Lester is a founding member of the Friends Group, which manages the outreach and educational programme that's been built up around the ship. So I will pass over to him now to tell us more about what they've achieved. Thank you, Lester.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure I can advance this. Okay, I may have to ask you, Henry. I can't see the advancing button. Perfect. Okay. So, well, thank you very much for inviting us to join this webinar. And I think you'll find recurring themes as we go through it. Certainly creating community benefit using historic ships is what we are about. Okay, so I can't advance. Will you move to the next one, please? So the story I'm going to spin tonight is something about the life of the vessel that I'm talking about its current status in the port of Blythe, how the Friends of LV50 engaged with this vessel, and what happened during the pandemic to allow us to develop a virtual tour and STEM. Next slide, please. So these three ensigns reflect the life of LV50. She was a light vessel, light ship of Trinity House between 1879 and 1951. She was built to start on the Seven Stone Reef, particularly constructed for that task. In 51, she was sold by Trinity House and decommissioned and bought by the Royal Northumberland Yacht Club and moved to Blythe. She's been there since 52. In 1999, she was recognized by the National Historic Ships. So her service life is all these red circles. You can see principally along the south and east coast of England. During the war, she served on the Nore, the First World War, in the mouth of the Thames, and in the Second World War was part of the D-Day activities from Calshot splits. Next slide, please. This is her on shambles, the typical light ship of the time. Next slide, please. And this is a view of Blythe. I want to bring Blythe in because it's part of, as it were, the story we communicate, because Blythe is an important part for its local community. It's a deep water harbor approached from the south, an ancient river, almost certainly a trading port for more than 1,000 years, with salt export, then fishing, war service, coal, aluminium, and now a green energy hub. Could I see the next slide, please? Just go back one. So these are images of her prior life as a fishing port. Next slide, please. Images during the World Wars as a submarine base and as an air sea rescue base. Next slide, please. And now, as you can see, full with massive boats, massive machines to service offshore green energy, laying cables, and servicing wind turbines. Next slide, please. And this is an image of H.Y. Tyne, the club ship, the house yacht of the Royal Northumberland Yacht Club. The hull is original, but you can see from the inset, I don't know if you can see the cursor, but the black shadowed area represents the former deck house. The rest of the upper deck has been enclosed by the club to provide accommodation. Next slide, please. So the Friends were established in 2014, essentially to communicate with the public, research the background of the vessel, and raise funds to facilitate all of these things. In the time since we were established, we've won 2 awards, a National Historic Ship Marsh Award in 2018, and as Hannah mentioned, we were Virtual Flagship of the Year for 2021. Next slide, please. And this is what these awards are for. Resonates very much with what Mary was saying. School visits, here's a school visit with a workshop in the forepeak, creating a flashing light circuit. What you can see is the whole ambience under deck is very much as she was. Next slide, please. And here, a local history group being given a tour of the vessel, both outside and inside, and also of the harbour, and appreciation of what's going on in the harbour. Next slide, please. So the pandemic stimulated us. All of these activities obviously ground to a halt in the pandemic, but we were stimulated to create a virtual tour and learning resources. At this stage, we had about 3 years of association with local schools and excellent rapport with the local teachers. And we commissioned this reconstruction, cutaway reconstruction by Roger Hutchins, a renowned maritime artist, of what the vessel would have looked like on station on the Seven Stone Reef in 1879. It's built up of a myriad of information, of archaeological stuff we've done under decks, of sketch drawings we've got from libraries, of archive material, of books, of all sorts of things. We've created an image of what she is like. And this image has been core to the virtual tour. Next slide, please. The tour links very much for children to STEM. And this is something I really think is worth taking on board for anybody considering doing similar work or engaging with children and with learning. STEM is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And there is, next slide, please, a national STEM agenda, learning center, and network, and it provides resources and affords structure to collaborate with partners using our unique material and environment, essentially to enthuse and inspire. Next slide, please. So let me show you a little bit of how this plays out in practice. This is the learning resources that we developed with our partners who were the primary school teachers. And each of these, can you see the cursor? Each of these, you can see Key Stage 1 writing activity, what is the lightship, where the red arrow is, and I'm going to show you that one. And I'm going to also show you this one, lower Key Stage 2, which is science history activity, cruise quarters. Each of these is an activity. It's fed by a video, a short video, and it has a learning agenda. It has a lesson plan to support it. So let's look at the first one and you can get an idea. Because of the time, we can't play the video, but this is the video. You click on the video and this is the story of what a lightship is. Next slide, please. Essentially, the video focuses on the core, inner, vital part of the lightship. The light, the foghorn, the engine which drives the foghorn with compressed air, and the winding mechanism which rotates the gimbaled light. So it's the lantern and the foghorn. Next slide, please. And here is the very simple, watch the video, what is a lightship? In the videos, we've seen that there's a flashing light, a foghorn, a signal carronade, and the top mark. So, and the task is then to identify it. Very simple, but these are for very small children. Next slide, please. Now let's go to understanding the cruise quarters. So a more complicated story, again, a video you click on, you see the story unfold. And next slide, please. And this very much focuses on the cruise quarters, which is forward. So here you can see a crewman, the stove, a hammock in the background, and the entrance to the cruise quarters, the anchor chains lying underneath, and the engine immediately behind. So next slide, please. So having watched the video, you then are tasked in this way. Here's an image of a crewman joining the vessel with his stock of provisions for his 8 weeks on board. And you are tasked to explain what you would take. And so you would, I don't know if, can we scroll down? Not quite. Okay, you're going to label in your the objects in your suitcase. and you're going to write a story about this. And this is the lesson, which is supported by the video. Next slide, please. Okay, so the message I'm communicating is we all have vessels steeped in heritage. They are engineering works, magical engineering works, housed in ports, awash with history. The vessel and the port can act as a springboard to engage with children, with everyone, and the STEM infrastructure can support and facilitate this. Next slide, please. And this resonates absolutely with the NHS story and with their logo, education, networking, partnerships, and community collaboration. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lester. I think that's a really fantastic illustration of the way that historic vessels can generate this material to produce STEM learning projects and engage the younger generation. And I particularly like the way that you'd produce those cutaways and the artwork. I think that really brings the ship to life. I'd like to move on now, please, to our third speaker tonight, which is Lynne Robbins. She is a volunteer coordinator for the Portsmouth Naval Base Property Trust. Amongst the trust portfolio is Boathouse 4, which is our ship-shaped network hub in the southeast. Boathouse 4 is home to a significant boat collection, as well as the Boat Building College IBTC Portsmouth. Lynne has worked for the Trust for 7 years, and she leads a team of more than 80 volunteers. So really looking forward to hearing a little bit more about that. Over to you now, Lynne.
Thanks, Hannah. So National Historic Ships have asked me to talk about how we go about recruiting and retaining our volunteers. In Boathouse 4, we take every opportunity. If you can just go back one, Henry. Sorry. We take every opportunity to let people know that we have a volunteer team and that we're recruiting, such as my shameless plug on screen. You skip forward, Henry. So volunteers, we have 84 volunteers at the moment. That goes up and down regularly. The majority of them work in our historic boat department. So we do have others that work in our gardens and other areas within the trust. To give you a bit of a breakdown of our volunteer team, 25% of our volunteers are female. We have a wide age range of 19 to 83. We're talking about sort of volunteers and how we get people involved in our community. Not all of our volunteers are local. We have most of them are local, but we have volunteers. I think the longest journey we have is a 320-mile round trip for somebody who comes down every few months for a few days at a time. But we do have somebody that does a 280-mile round trip on a weekly basis, and we have others that do sort of not quite that long, but long journeys as well. So it's important to note that when we talk about getting volunteers to engage in our local communities, sorry, it's not just about our local community. It's not just about those sort of within the 5-10 mile radius or whatever it might be. For us, our community that we try to recruit from might mean our veteran community, sailing community, ex-dockyard workers, that kind of thing. So that's an important definition to note, that it's not just about local community, it's what your communities might be. Next slide, please, Henry. So how do we recruit? We do have good links with our local volunteer recruitment centre, which is run by the council. They happen to be the top hit on Google if you Google Portsmouth volunteering. So it's important for us to work with them. We feed back on the recruits that they put forward to us, because it helps them with their metrics and therefore their funding. And obviously if we get back to them and they don't have to chase us, it means that they're more likely to send people our way. We let them know what we're doing and keep them up to date. We've got details on our website. So if you find out about volunteering, if you happen to overhear that somebody volunteers, you can go there and obviously have a look and find out a bit more about it. As I said before, every opportunity to mention that we're recruiting for volunteers is taken. We don't do specific recruitment events. We make sure we mention it on tours, open days, charters, anything we've got going on, we try and mention about volunteering. Some of the processes that some of the people that we have volunteering with us first found out about us many years ago before they started. So it's often something that people file away and then come back to when their life allows them to volunteer, whether it's because they've retired or children are older or whatever it might be that's stopping them volunteering now. It's something that they file away. So don't be disheartened if you hold a recruitment event and you don't get anybody sign up on the day. It's often something that people file away for later use. Volunteer-led recruitment process. We don't chase volunteers. So if we get people coming in and wanting to find out about volunteering, we tell them about it, but we let them lead that process. So if they don't return an application form, or if they don't come back to us after a taster day, that's not something we chase on. We need our volunteers to be engaged and want to be here, and they need to be self-motivated enough to turn up rather than us chasing them. And they're not here for the pay, so they have to want to be here. Being open and honest about what we do is quite key as well. We need to manage expectations. We can't offer pay, as we said. What else can we offer? If you skip forward to the next slide, Henry. So these are sort of our flagships. So we've got MASB at the front, who we look after. We've got MGB 81 and HSL 102. So if we start saying, oh, come and volunteer with us, you can go out on trips on these boats all the time, you know, that's the kind of thing we do all the time. It's just not the reality. So actually they end up getting very frustrated and like we've sold them a lemon, which we would have done, and obviously very disgruntled with us. So it's important that we're open and honest and manage their expectations right from the word go. So we do taste a day, so we give them an honest taste a day. We don't put on a show. What they see is what they get. Next slide, please, Henry. So who do we recruit? Basically, almost anyone. So we don't have a person spec. We'd obviously love to have a whole team full of fully qualified and highly experienced shipwrights, but that isn't the reality, and it's also not what we actually need. We need people who can cover off all the jobs that need doing. So we do ask that people have a passion for what we're trying to achieve, and that they are willing and able to follow our health and safety rules. And that's really the nuts and bolts of what we need from our volunteer team in the way of person spec. As I said before, it's anybody we meet is a potential volunteer. So whether it's just somebody turning up on an open day or somebody just popping their head through Boathouse for. So it's important to just note that it doesn't have to be somebody that you go after. Sorry, I've covered the bit that takes time to take years to commit already. Be accepting but realistic. We've got some volunteers that need additional support, and that's absolutely fine. We have an infrastructure in place where we can do that, but we do need to be realistic about who we can take on and whether we can support them effectively. So we need to be open and honest with them about what if we can meet their needs, but also make sure we're signposting them on if we can't meet their needs. Often applicants can come across as difficult when they first start with us. They're perhaps used to having high-flying careers and being the person to tell everybody what to do. Don't be put off, is what I would say here. So sometimes they're going to be wanting to tell you that there's better ways to do things. Sometimes they're right. Give them the opportunity to get embedded in what you do and how they find things. After a while, generally we find they realise that they don't need to prove themselves at every turn, and actually they've got something to input into the team, but so has everybody else. Some of our key volunteers that we've got now had what you might refer to as a rocky start. So do give people time to bed in. It's often a big change for people, especially if they're newly retired or have come straight from another job. So give them time. Next slide, please, Henry. Retention. Don't sweat it if they don't want to stay. You can't make them stay, they are volunteers. There's generally lots of other people, or we find there's other people that want to step into that role. So if they don't want to stay with you, just let them go. We're really lucky at the moment that we've got some funding to cover things like volunteer expenses. But that's not always the case, and it won't always be the case with us. So just some thoughts on that. At the moment, we provide things like tea and coffee. So that's a really good way of valuing them, giving them somewhere warm to go and have a cup of tea and coffee. And it's not generally that expensive. We don't provide uniforms. As you say, I'm wearing a Boathouse 4 jacket here, but we do provide a list of uniforms that they can buy with Boathouse 4 logos on there. So don't underestimate the value that people place on being part of a team, being part of what's going on, and being part of the cool gang, as we like to refer to it, but it's probably not. Name badges. I don't know if you can see this on the screen. Find it there. Sorry, there's too much light in here, so try and get the reflection there going. We have a badge making machine. We used to sort of buy them, and they're quite expensive to do this that way. I think this was about £65 on eBay. So they're personalised. So again, it's making people feel like they're part of the team, and it's also something we can do fairly instantly, so they don't have to wait weeks or months for you to get an order together and get those done. Opportunities. So we have paid positions that come up every once in a while. So it's making sure that they feel that they can apply for those if it's applicable, if that's what they want to do. We often have opportunities that come up. We went to Southampton Boat Show last year, so it's making sure they know that they can come and join us on those kind of things. And communication. We use emails because whole team events don't work for us. There's too many people, not everybody can make it, so but do what works for you on that side of things. And obviously listen to them and nip issues in the bud. Often they're not doing it to be awkward. If they're doing something wrong, they're not doing it to be awkward. If they are, that needs nipping in the bud, but generally we find it's because they don't know any better, or that's what they've always done and nobody's told them it's changed. I'm going to leave you on this one as snitches. So not everybody will come and tell you if something's wrong. They either assume you know already, or that you're too busy, they don't want to be a pain, or just don't want to come and talk to you. So if you've got people on your team that everybody else talks to, sidle up to them and find out what's going on. That's what works for us sometimes with the quieter ones. I shall leave you there.
Thank you very much, Lynn. I think we'd all agree that volunteers are absolutely the lifeblood of our sector, but it's not always that easy to know how to recruit and manage them. So yeah, it's really, really helpful to have your insight and some of those top tips. So thank you for sharing. I'm sure we'll probably come back to that topic in the Q&A as well if we have time. But for now, I'd like to move on to our final speaker tonight, which is Emma Harley. Emma is the Director, Business Manager and First Mate at Sailing Tectona. And with her partner and friend, Emma set this sail training organisation up back in 2018. Her vision was to provide young people and those suffering with addiction or mental health issues with an inspiring experience. We all know the powerful role that heritage can play for those climbing back into society. So I'm really keen to hear how this project's been working. Thank you, Emma.
Great, thank you, Hannah, and yeah, thanks to Lynn and Lester and Mary for really interesting presentations this evening. As Hannah said, hi everyone, my name is Emma. I'm here tonight to tell you a bit about Sailing Tectona. Henry, if you could just slip onto the next slide, that'd be great. So yeah, we're quite a small charitable sail training organisation based down in Plymouth. And our aim is to inspire positive change in people's lives through sail training. And as Hannah mentioned, we work with young people from all backgrounds, as well as adults in recovery from drug and alcohol addiction and mental health issues. Next slide, please, Henry. We have 2 heritage vessels with which we do this work, and there they are, both there and sailing along together. Doesn't happen that often. Next slide, please. Tectona was our first vessel. Oh, there they are again. I forgot what slides I put in here. They're lovely. There they are. Next slide, please, Henry. So Tectona, she's a great vessel. She was built back in 1928 on a beach in India. She's made out of teak, which is where her name comes from. It's Latin. Tectona's Latin for teak. So she's 65 foot, gaff cutter. She was originally built for a private individual as their yacht. And we do like to tell everyone who sails on her that she was built by elephants, because they would drag the trees from the forest down to the beach for her to be built. Next slide, please. She has had a varied life, and this was her in the kind of 50s and 60s. I love these black and white pictures. Next slide, please. And in the kind of 60s, she did some amazing voyages, and she actually featured in the National Geographic, which is there this picture is from. Next slide, please. And in the kind of late 60s through to the 80s, she was actually owned by the citizens of Plymouth, which I think is a really interesting position for her to be in. She was used by what was then like the Nautical College back then, and they sent all of their cadets who were going to go on and be merchant navy, engineers and deck officers and things. They all sailed on board Tectona as part of their course. So that was her doing a thing there. And next slide, please. In 2009, after that, she did various things, but 2009, she was in a shipyard in the south of France, I think. And yeah, a dear friend of ours, Dr. Roger Crabtree, found her and thought this would be a great boat for sail training. So he brought her back to the UK with the main vision of using her for recovery work. Put a new deck on her, as you can see. And in 2018, next slide please, we started operating her here at Sailing Tectona. Olga, on the other hand, has much more local beginnings. She was actually built in Porthleven in Cornwall in 1909, which hopefully you'll see on the next slide. She's a 56-foot Bristol Channel pilot cutter. She worked out of Barry in the kind of early 1900s. And next slide, please. She was then kind of privately owned after the steam came in and the pilot cutters and sailing ones were no longer needed. And yeah, she was privately owned for a long time. And then in the 80s, she was bought by Swansea Museum. Next slide, please. And they looked after her really well for a long time, did a lot of work in restoring her and yeah, keeping her going. And then in 2019, they were looking for someone to operate the boat and get more of the community involved in sailing on her. And so that's when we added her to our fleet and started sailing her as well. Next slide, please. So that's her sailing along when we took her on. And you'll note that was 2019, which is right before the pandemic hit, but we'll come to that later. So much as these are 2 incredible vessels, it's actually the work we do on them that I think is like the most incredible thing. That's, you know, the thing I love about these boats is what they can provide to people. And it's what we do with them. We aim to inspire positive change in people's lives. And that might sound quite dramatic, but by going sailing on these boats, people, they can laugh, they can be that part of that community on board who really build trust in each other and increase their confidence whilst they're on board. Next slide, please. And this is different for everyone, whether a young person or a person in recovery. It can be as simple as learning to cook a meal and building friends, or more kind of deeper lessons of resilience, trust, things like this. And how do we do that? Well, we do residential sailing voyages for groups, either of young people or adults in recovery. And our voyages are normally about 6 days long, although sometimes we make it shorter or longer if that's going to suit the group better. Our voyages normally start and finish in Plymouth, And during the 5 days, we explore the local Devon and Cornish coast, all dependent on the weather, of course, you know, going to bays or rivers, and completely what the group would like to get out of the week as well. They're very much involved in where we go. And next slide, please, Henry. So there are roughly between 8 to 10 people on each voyage, alongside our 3 fully qualified sea staff. And the people who come sailing with us, they don't require any previous sailing experience. In fact, a lot of the people that we work with have never been on a boat before, any kind of boat. And it's amazing how many people, even in Plymouth, young people in Plymouth, have never seen the sea, which you would think is unbelievable. But yeah, we're there to try and make it accessible to everyone. And next slide, please. So yeah, these are some of our recovery groups. And as you can see from this photo on the left, we go out in all weathers. And the good thing about going for a week is that even if you do have one day where you're storm bound, hopefully at some point that week you will get some sailing in. So whilst the group are on board, they get involved in all aspects of the voyage, from hoisting sails, helming, navigating, to more of the domestic things like cooking and cleaning. And at the beginning of the voyage, our sea staff are really involved in supporting the group through these tasks. So they give a lot of clear instruction, they do some, you know, lots of demonstration and encouraging people. However, because the tasks are repeated each day, sometimes several times a day, the group really start to pick up things like how the sails go up and how to helm and how to fill in the logbook. And next slide, please, Henry. And so this means that the sea staff are really able to step back throughout the week and allow the group to really thrive. And in doing this, we are allowing people to achieve things that they didn't think they could, basically. And we as sea staff know that they can achieve it, but they didn't realise. Might be something as simple as getting out of bed early in the morning, cooking a meal for other people, and all the way up to leading a sail hoist, or sometimes acting skipper for the day. And we as sea staff, we've got a really great team of sea staff who are able to identify people's strengths and help them set a challenge that they will definitely achieve. And when they do so, and they didn't think they could, and then they achieve it, and they have, you know, helmed a 70-foot, 70-ton teak boat when they can't drive, that just gives them that huge boost of confidence and realize how capable they are, both on the boat and hopefully back in their lives at home as well. And next slide, please, Henry. Oh, this is everyone cooking and cleaning and sleeping in the little bunks. And I think being on a boat in such small quarters with other people really does help build those skills of resilience, trust, patience. Yeah. And equally as important as all the sailing stuff are those more life type skills. Next slide, please. And that comes from the kind of living on board together. Things like not having any phone signal and, you know, eating meals together around the table, playing games and having a laugh, going for a barbecue on a beach. Like, these are such amazing things that a lot of people just haven't experienced before. And it can really make people relax and speak to each other in a much more deep way than they might when they are ashore. And we get some great feedback from everyone who sails on board. Next slide, please. And I'll bring your attention to the second one in particularly. I'll just read it quickly. This was a lady who'd been a drug addict for a long time, was now in recovery. And she said, "The thing that struck me most were the fact that I could laugh and be young again. Seems like a weird thing to say as an addict, but we had to grow up very quick. On the voyage, I found the fun in me, which I thought I needed drugs to bring out, when really it had been in me the whole time." What an incredible thing for someone to say after spending a week on a boat. And it really still blows my mind that, you know, people have that experience. And I feel just privileged that our organisation can help people in this way. And now I talked for, I don't know how long, on how wonderful it all is. And it really is. However, Hannah and Henry asked us to be quite frank and as open as we could be this evening about our highs as well as our lows. And in all honesty, the last 3 years have been extremely challenging, much as at the same time they've brought us great joy. And next slide, please, Henry. When COVID hit in March 2020, it's funny looking back, but at the time we weren't to know like the devastating impact it'd have on our ability to undertake our work. The whole of 2020, we didn't go sailing at all, basically. We didn't run any voyages, any residential voyages. We did move to some online activities to try and keep our community engaged. We did virtual racing and sailing lessons. We did knot sessions. We sent people little packages in the post of like rope and whipping twine and palms and needles, and we did like whipping and splicing lessons, things like this. We did lessons on voyage and weather and all sorts. But what we really learned from that was that whilst it's better than nothing, and given this situation, it was something, but people that we work with, particularly those in recovery, they really thrive on that strong and unique in-person interaction that you get from being on the boat. So in late 2020, after a year of no sailing, we had to make a decision about our future. Do we aim to run both boats in 2021? At this point, we still didn't know. There was no vaccine yet. You know, what would the future look like? And how could we build that social interaction into our program when we might not be able to go sailing? The number of COVID cases were rising, and so we decided to adapt slightly our activities. Kind of slightly fortunately, or fortuitously, Tectona was in need of a bit of TLC, and we thought actually this might be a really good opportunity to do this work of quite a big internal renovation, whilst not impacting on our sailing too much, because we thought in 2021 we might not be able to sail, and we might certainly not be able to fill both boats. So in late 2020, early 2021, and we embarked on quite an extended refit of Tectona. Next slide, please, Lester. Yeah, here we go. So yeah, we did loads of, oh, hang on, my page is gone. So yeah, we made some great progress with our volunteers on Tectona's refit. We built a new mizzen mast. Next slide, please, Henry. And here it is in the boat with over 50, oh, it's gone. There was over 50 volunteers involved in building that, so really exciting. Never mind, must be missing. The next thing we did was we stripped out the accommodation. So now there's basically nothing inside Tectona. You can see from the next slide, we did a big survey of all her frames and planks. We cleaned out the bilges, we cleaned the ballast, and we've painted all the bilges, and they look lovely, shiny and new now. Hopefully the next slide will show you. And we involved our volunteers at all stages of this by running volunteer days once a week. And so that really built in that social interaction that we were missing when we weren't sailing. Next slide, please. I think you'll see everyone having that lunch, eating together, talking, and starting to build a similar experiences on the boat. Meanwhile, in 2021, obviously we got Olga back up and running, so that was all good. I'd just like to briefly touch on our other challenge, which, like many people, is fundraising. Next slide, please, Henry. And, you know, pandemic or no pandemic, that is undoubtedly our biggest challenge. We have a fantastic volunteer fundraisers who spend a lot of time in front of laptops. Next slide. But we also try and get out and do activities in the community. Now, I don't have the answer of how to get over the challenge of fundraising. Unfortunately, there's no pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. But I always just try and remember why we're doing this. Next slide, please, Henry. Oh, and the next one. That's everyone having a lovely garden party. For me, it's all about those people, the young people and the people in recovery, whose life we might just affect in a positive way by what we do. And if ever I'm looking at paperwork and the finances and thinking, how are we going to do this? I get on the boat and I go sailing and I try and touch the joy in our project again. So yeah, thank you so much for listening to me. Hopefully that's been some ideas of what we get up to, and look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you very much, Emma. That was really good, and really thank you for being so frank. It's always interesting to hear the highs and the lows of a project, and see how you've handled those. So yeah, thank you for sharing that with us. On behalf of the audience, I'd like to say a huge thank you to all of our 4 speakers from this evening, and the really interesting insight that they've offered into their various operations and the ways that they have made a difference to the groups and the people that have interacted with them. In a minute, we're going to open out the questions to you in the audience. So if you haven't already, please do post any questions in the Q&A box, or use the chat function. But first of all, we're running a short poll. So on the screen now, you should see a series of options, choices to choose from, to tell us what you in the audience see as the main challenge facing historic ship and boat projects at the moment. So please do tick the box that you feel is most relevant. Is it lack of awareness in the community? Do we need greater marketing to increase visitor numbers? Are you struggling with funding for repairs? Is it lack of skills, or is it simply about manpower and more volunteers? We will share the answers with you shortly, so bear with us while we take that vote. And in the meantime, I'd like to gather our speakers back, please, ready for the Q&A session. So if I could ask all the speakers now to unmute and put their cameras on. Lovely, thank you very much. Welcome back to you all. And while we're just waiting for that poll to complete, the first question that I was going to put to you as a panel, I think actually, bear with us, we do have the response to the first poll, so you should be able to see on your screen. Probably not surprising that in fact fundraising for repairs or operational use for vessels is seen as the biggest challenge. That's 50% of you tick that box, particularly as Emma said, given the issues resulting and still hanging on from the pandemic. We all know it's been a very tricky period, so not surprising there, but interesting marketing to increase visitor numbers, and that issue around raising awareness in the community, obviously very topical tonight, both coming in sort of joint second in the poll. So yeah, thank you for your participation in that. We will keep that on record with all the other material that we're gathering from these sessions. I'd now like to turn to the panel. As I say, we have a number of questions that have come in, and also ones that we've got here to ask each of you. The first question is, you've spoken about the benefits your project or organisation has brought to the individuals or the community you work with, but do you feel that this has then translated to a wider appreciation of your vessel or maritime heritage in your area? And if you do, can you give any examples of this? So not just directly the sort of individuals that you may have interacted with, but do you feel that's had a sort of knock-on benefit, I guess, to wider appreciation of the heritage? Who'd like to have a go at answering this one? Perhaps I could come to Mary first, please.
I'd say absolutely yes, Hannah, and the evidence is there. And if I look at the community, not just locally, but even wider, the name Skylark, if you stop someone in the street and go, do you know anything about Skylark IX? And probably they'll go, oh, that little boat that was in, you know, that sank in the River Leven. But they know the story. I think we have a wonderful project manager. We're in the local media, we're on TV. Her name is there, and her name, you know, is on everyone's lips. So it isn't just the individuals, but people talk, people share those successes, don't they? They share those experiences. And you know, when I was listening to Emma, well, don't they just go out and they talk to their friends. And we've just seen on social media, perhaps there's evidence there. We can see how that's grown, and worldwide. We have followers all over the world, you know, Brazil, North America, yeah, Canada, all of these far-flung places. We have people, young people, that if you think, I suppose we were very lucky with the Harry Styles being in the Dunkirk film when it came out a few years ago. And the young people, the Harry Styles fans, raised £3,000 for Skylark to help with storage. And they've followed her story. And many of them have come back and said, I knew nothing about the little ships, Dunkirk, the history, and they've gone and they've researched it. And that's a win for sure. And that's keeping the, you know, the history, the heritage going to a younger generation. And for me, that's important, that's where they take that story forward. But yeah, absolutely wider appreciation of the vessel.
Yeah, that's lovely to hear, Mary. That's, I think, particularly how sort of word of mouth can spread, whether it is just locally around you or on social media or internationally. I mean, that's fantastic to hear. Do any other of our speakers want to come in on this point?
Yes, I'm quite happy to.
Thanks, Lester.
Elaborate. I think this is all very true. That's a worthwhile experience on a visit opens eyes to all sorts of possibilities. This vessel, LV50, has been in Blythe Harbour for more than 70 years. Many people knew nothing of it, despite living in Blythe all their lives. And having visited the vessel, we often have remarks, I just had no idea that this was here. And it's such a joy. So since we've been working since 2014, the pride of the town has significantly enhanced. We've recently got a Blue Plaque Award, and the vessel is part of a Blue Plaque walk. So hugely enhancing the prestige for people of the port and the vessel in the life of Blythe, and of course the involvement of the children.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you, Lester. Yeah, again, really really good to hear, I think, how it does have that knock-on effect in the wider community. Okay, we've got a couple of questions that have come in here directly for Emma, actually, about her operations. So yeah, if I could just ask kind of practical questions, I guess, Emma. Firstly, we've got a question asking whether your 3 sea staff are paid employees, and also whether to run your courses you're able to access any social prescribed funding through the NHS, or how you fund those courses.
Great, thank you, Hannah, and yeah, thanks to whoever asked those questions. First of all, our sea staff, yes, we do pay our skipper and first mate, and we have a great pool of mainly freelance people that help us with those voyages. We do a lot of training to make sure they understand our boat and our voyages, but they're great, some great people. And in terms of the third member of staff, we've actually started this year a new volunteer sea staff program. So we've got about 20 people joining us this year on training to become that third member of staff. So yeah, hopefully that answers that question. And the other question, in terms of our recovery voyages, we haven't been able to access any social prescribing funding, and if anyone has any way of helping with that, I'd love to hear it, because yeah, I think social prescribing is a great idea, but we've not been able to access any of the funding directly, and we've had people pointed towards us, so there must be GPs and social prescribers who are aware of our project, but we've never been able to get any funding to support those people. We mainly do that through fundraising. So yeah, I'd love to hear if anyone has any good suggestions on that.
Thanks, Emma. So just on that, are your courses, do people self-fund their way through it, or do you fundraise and then give bursaries? What's the sort of the main way that you cover the costs?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a mixture. Some people can fund themselves. We always encourage people, even if they can't fund anything themselves, to do some sort of fundraising themselves, because then they really get that buy-in to the voyage. But we do a lot of fundraising so that we have a bursary scheme so people can apply, because we don't want finances to be a barrier to anyone accessing this opportunity. I think, unfortunately, sometimes sailing, maybe particularly old boats, can be seen as a bit of a privileged thing. And I think we really, as an industry, have an opportunity to kind of blow that out the water and show that actually this is for everyone in the community. But the only way we can do that is to make it accessible and affordable for everyone. So
yeah, thank you for clarifying that, Emma. I think I love that idea of people fundraising to get that sense of ownership as well. I think that's a really nice way to get over the funding issue, actually. Yeah, I love that. So, okay, we'd like to just now move on to another question, which is around the STEM learning that we've heard about, particularly from Leicester. And I think it would be helpful, first of all, to just, Leicester, if you could say a little bit more maybe about the benefits of engaging with your local STEM hub, and perhaps sharing that experience. We've got a question from the audience where somebody's saying they've found it very difficult to get local schools to buy into the learning package that they've put together, even though it's been put together with the help of primary school teachers. And so if you could perhaps say a little bit more about how you've managed to develop those relationships with the schools, I think that would be really useful.
Okay, so I think we've been very fortunate in that the harbour is an important STEM hub and has commissioned through an educationalist a coordination of visiting and resources. And so we didn't have too much legwork in a way to do to link into this. Fortunately, the individual who coordinates all of this saw the potential that we were offering and how this could triangulate so readily. And I think all of the vessels that we're talking about that have been spoken about this evening have STEM resonance. They are all technological engineering pieces. All of that resonates with the whole STEM agenda. So whoever asked the question, I don't know why they've had so much difficulty making headway. We were encouraged by the educationalist, and having successfully undertaken, if you like, generic visiting, the teachers were impressed by the learning opportunities. And when we engaged with them, it was they who were able to put together the learning plans. The learning plans were not developed by us, not by the friends, but by the teachers, the group of teachers representing First Schools in Blythe. So it's that community engagement that is being spoken about, the engagement with the primary schools. We're now engaged in a similar exercise with the high schools, and that has, if you like, because of the complexity and the older the age of the children, has much more potential in it, in a way, to be easily triangulated with the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. But it's the same exercise. It's meeting with the teachers, showing them around the vessel, discussing how the vessel might be a springboard, and often it is. We've all got those things, and the port is also a springboard because the ports are rich in history. And just talking about the port, as you approach our vessel, you've got to walk through the harbour, and part of the tour, that both the online and the real tour, is highlighting the wonderful things that you're seeing around you, from fishing ships to pilot boats to those massive machines that repair wind turbines.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Lester. And I don't know if anybody else on the panel who's had experience of working with schools wants to also come in there. I mean, perhaps not just specifically around STEM activities, but also just building that relationship with schools. How did any of you kick that off?
I think
Mary.
Yeah, we're very involved with schools, and not STEM. It's more projects and the local schools, secondary and primary schools. So the teachers, just as Lester said, the teachers have put the learning activities together, and they tend to be around Dunkirk, World War I, World War II. But the children also, they'll do fundraising activities for Skylark as well. They'll take part in the remembrance. They'll come along to the cenotaph, take part in remembrance. For instance, the secondary schools in the past have brought their band, to the music department to come and perform at different fundraising events and so on. But it is, it's the children, whatever we do, there are children involved in that. And it's the relationships. I think Lester is saying it is that establishing those relationships, isn't it, with the head teachers and the senior teachers. And that's what we've done. And that grows as well, Hannah. That one school takes part, and then another school go, oh, we would like to be a part of that next year, and it grows within the community.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you, Mary. Okay, well, thank you all for that. I think I just wanted to, since this is really about the benefits that that historic vessels can bring for the community and for individuals, I just wanted to touch briefly on the kind of human story of individual benefit, which I think is so compelling, and in a way being able to tell some of those life-changing stories can be the greatest advocate to encourage others to come into the sector, particularly as Emma said in her presentation, that quote from the recovering addict. I mean, that's incredibly powerful thing to share, and hopefully would be a fantastic way to draw others in. But is there a difficulty, I guess, in how you can share those stories in a considerate way, because some of those are incredibly personal stories? So how do you pitch and share those stories, I guess? Perhaps coming to you, Emma, first.
Yeah, thanks, Hannah. I think it's a really good question, and I think it's actually one of the most powerful tools we have to engage people in the work that we do. Some people might not get the whole boat thing, or why do you want to save an old boat? Like, I don't understand. But what they do understand straight away is how this helps other people and the human story behind it. So yeah, I think it's critically important actually to tell that story. And it's not easy, like we still haven't found the right balance. We get feedback from our voyages and we anonymize it all. So obviously those names are not the people who it actually was. That can definitely help in people not feeling like their personal story is going out there. But equally, we do have people who've sailed with us who've come back, got involved in our refit project, and they're quite happy for their story to be shared. Because they themselves have benefited from it. And likewise, as Mary was saying earlier, it's that word of mouth, they want to tell other people. So yeah, again, it's just relationships, it's keeping those people involved, chatting to them, making sure they're happy to share. And yeah, I don't know the right answer, perhaps more on social media about the people, but it's definitely a difficult one to get right. So sorry, I don't have a good answer.
No, that's a perfect answer. Thank you. And I mean, I'd just like to bring Lynne in there as well, because I think, again, with the volunteering aspects, it's interesting to think about, you obviously want to celebrate your volunteers and to share their stories and the work that they've done. So I guess the flip side of managing perhaps the slightly sensitive element of some of the personal stories, but then with the volunteering, presumably they're very happy for you to celebrate their achievements.
Yes, I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? Because the achievements that sort of perhaps matter more are those that have got perhaps some support issues or needs when they start with us, and then perhaps they go on to get a job later on, and that's when it does get into kind of not wanting to tell their stories. It's too identifiable for us. But I mean, one story that always sticks in my mind is somebody that actually never started volunteering with us. So he was a veteran, wanted to get back into work and just wasn't getting anywhere, and came to us. And when we said, yes, you know, you can join us, it actually gave him enough of a confidence boost that he then went and got a job. So although that wasn't a success from our point of view of actually getting somebody in and volunteering and sort of helping to move the projects on, socially, it was very much a success because he was able to go and do what he ultimately wanted to do. So depends how you measure your success on these things, isn't it, as to whether you measure it on the progress on your projects or the social responsibility side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you, Lynn. And I think I mean, we could carry on, I think, debating this and talking about this issue for much longer than we've got. So that's probably a good note to end it on. But yeah, thank you very much for that, all of you, and for those additional insights. And if anyone in the audience has got any questions they didn't manage to put tonight or that come up later, do feel free to email us at National Historic Ships, and we can pass it on to the relevant person on the panel. So yeah, thank you again to all of our speakers. Now on your screen now, you can see the second of tonight's polls. This time we're asking you about topics for future webinars. So please do tick your box of choice. We're asking what event you would like us to host next. Should it focus on fundraising? Would you like tips for applying for a grant? Should we be looking at how we can raise awareness of the sector nationally? Or perhaps something around the supporting infrastructure for ships? So yeah, thank you for your participation, and we will see the results of that on our screen shortly. So this now brings us to the final part of tonight's event, where I'm going to invite Henry Cleary, Vice Chair of the Maritime Heritage Trust, with whom we've partnered to produce these webinars, to join me in a few closing remarks and observations. Henry, I know you're busy with the technology on the poll, but if you're able to move us on to the final slide, that would be lovely. And we do have the results of that poll. Thank you for participating. Again, I guess linked to the first poll, unsurprisingly, the top choice is around fundraising techniques and methods for applying for a grant. We are very, very happy to look at that and to put together a session on it. Just to let everybody know, we will be having a short break in the webinar programme over the summer season, because we know most of you will be out and about with the vessels, but we will be back again in the autumn, and we will make sure that fundraising is absolutely a subject on the agenda. We'll be advertising the dates and the registration details for the next webinar via our website and social media accounts later in the year. So do keep an eye out for these if you've enjoyed tonight and you'd like to take part again. So if I could now ask our panel members to please switch their cameras off, and Henry to join me on the screen. Thank you very much. And yeah, Henry, this is just a chance really for us to reflect on the last two webinars that we've held. Obviously, these talks sprang from a concern that a new approach was needed for historic vessels if they were to survive. As I've said, the first webinar looked at ways of making historic vessels relevant and reaching new audiences, whether that was through social media, working with partners, seizing opportunities, or getting involved with national programmes. Tonight, we've talked about the impact that historic vessels can have on people's lives, but I'd be interested to hear from you now. How do you think what we've heard in these two sessions can help us ensure the value of our sector is recognised, and what can we do to build on what we've learned so far?
Well, thank you very much, Hannah. And before I say anything, can I just say a very big thank you to you, and also to all tonight's speakers, all of whom I think really touched our hearts. Because of the way in which they're approaching their projects and the outreach that they're achieving. Really, really heartwarming. I mean, I think in a way it is very, very appropriate, because one of the things that came out of the first webinar was that simply carrying on as we were is not an option. Many of the vessels that we care about were saved by small groups of enthusiasts or museums, both of which are much more severely challenged now. And Dan Cross, who gave the first talk, had some very dramatic illustrations of what had happened with projects in Northwest, in Merseyside and the Northwest. On the other hand, some extraordinary new opportunities have opened up, particularly those related to social media. But not just that, because in the second part of the first talk, Richard Titchener of the Sea Change Trust gave an account of how really quite extraordinarily they've been able to raise something like £750,000 over 10 years to build a new replica Thames sailing barge for doing things which are very similar to what we've heard about tonight from Emma. I think one of the common themes that's emerging is that if we want to keep our maritime heritage going, we have to draw a much bigger community circle around it. In other words, we've got to be looking out at people and activities very much the way Mary was talking about, and really kind of making the project something of interest to people, whether or not they're interested in old boats. One thing that, because as Emma correctly said, you know, the thing that is absolutely unbeatable in reaching everyone is the human journey, the human experience of overcoming challenges, maturing, reaching, being able to achieve goals, and overcoming all the setbacks that one encounters. And that is a universal appeal. And I was very struck over the Christmas period by one of the newspapers running almost a daily, if not every few days, appeal for 4 or 5 charities. And they were basically wildlife charities and outdoor charities. Not one of them led on the detail of what the charity did. All of them led on the human story of people who were benefiting from the charity. So the typical illustration was of a group of youngsters, usually absolutely soaked and in the most dire conditions, but with broad smiles on their faces, just as we saw with some of the pictures tonight. So getting out there and relating our activities to that, I think, has got to be the way forward. So I'm much encouraged by the degree of interest there is in this. But obviously, you know, we can do with more examples, we can do with more passing on of techniques, and we're certainly going to try, and you and I had a word about this earlier, Hannah, today, and we're certainly going to try and do that in the fundraising area, which we will tackle later in the year. But please keep the suggestions coming, and if you think there are other things we can do that would be helpful, please let us know.
Yeah, thank you very much, Henry. I completely agree with those comments. And I think also from my perspective, it's really great to see organisations responding to our invitation and stepping up to share their experiences with the wider sector, and that sort of willingness to openly share their learning and what they've produced and work collectively together now across the sector to, you know, for the benefit of historic vessels. And with that in mind, there are a couple of sort of practical opportunities, I guess, that have come up that I'd just like to share with the audience before we close. First of all, later on in the year, we've been working with Maritime UK, and they will be hosting Maritime Careers Week. And as part of this, they'll be encouraging maritime sites of all kinds to open their doors to visiting school groups. And they'll be partnering with us at National Historic Ships for the first time to encourage heritage sites that have got historic vessels to get involved. So if this is something that appeals to you, if you're looking for ways to integrate with your local local schools and to get school children on board, maybe as a first step to producing something like those STEM learning resources, this is a really good way to do it. So Maritime UK, Maritime Careers Week, it'll be the week of the 10th of October. Please get in touch at the email address on the screen for National Historic Ships if you'd like to register your interest to host some school groups during that time. And then the other element, just briefly, is that thanks to a suggestion from Leicester when LV50 was the National Historic Ships flagship, we created a page on our website bringing together all the learning resources developed by historic vessels across the UK. So if you've got any material you'd like to add to that page, again, get in touch with us afterwards, or if you just want to see what other ships have developed and continue building on those ideas for your own project, that place is also a really good place to start. So yeah, just a few practical tips to end on. So that does bring tonight's event to a close. It's all we've got time for, but I would like to thank Henry as my co-host and the Maritime Heritage Trust for partnering with us to organise and run this webinar. I hope you found it as interesting as I have. I hope it's provided some new ideas or inspiration for your vessel projects, or perhaps it's just endorsed areas that you've already been working on or thinking of exploring. So thank you again to our speakers, and until we meet for our next webinar in the autumn, do have a very good evening, and thank you for joining us. Good night.